Hey there, Emma here, and in 2023 I hosted a painting challenge called Dogtober where we painted a different dog breed every day of the month. You may have seen some of the clips that I posted on Shorts at the time, just showing like a few little clips from each painting, but I've decided to go and pull out the real-time footage and share them this year so you can follow along if you'd like to. A couple of disclaimers / explainers. The point of the challenge for me was that I wanted to try and loosen up. I'm a realistic portrait artist, and so I gave myself a smaller size to work with as well as a time frame. I'm painting on roughly about A6 size paper, which is pretty small. In terms of measurements, that's like roughly 10.5 centimeters by 14.8 centimeters or 4.1 by 5.8 inches. And I also tried to set myself a time limit of about 15 minutes. I really wanted to challenge myself to loosen up, but you can approach this any way you like. Maybe you'll do it in a different medium or a certain color palette. The options are endless, totally up to you, but you're more than welcome to follow along, and these are kind of like mini tutorials. I do want to point out though that as this was unusual for me and a challenge to me, not all of them are that good. I really struggled in the beginning to start loosening up, and particularly struggled with the long-haired dogs. But you know, it's an adventure and you'll see me progress through the month and learn a lot. If you want to grab the outline sketches, I have put all 31 sketches into a document, a PDF that you can download from my website. I will link that in the description. You'll just need to pop your email address in, which will sign you up to my mailing list, but then you'll get the document with all 31 outline sketches, roughly about the same size that I'm painting. You're more than welcome to print them, trace them, size them up or down if you need to. I'll be working with my usual set of supplies and mixing colors as well, but I will talk you through the process as we go. Let's jump in. Day 5 of Dogtober, and we are painting a bichon frise. Is that the correct way to pronounce it? Probably not, but it is the best you're going to get out of me. So we are going to get started. And look, this one could even take you probably less time than me, to be honest. I am reactivating a purpley grey color that I had on my palette. If you want to make that from scratch, you can just create a purple color with red and blue and then add some yellow to it to take the edge off. Eventually, you are going to keep cancelling that purple out till you get to some kind of grey colour. I like it to have a bit of a bias anyway, so mine still is a bit purple, but adding that yellow will really tone it down. So to get started, I am doing some wet on wet, which I have been saying in this process so far, I really didn't like that I was doing that because I feel like it's just not the right way to approach a loose painting, but I really didn't know how else to do this one, being a little white fluffy dog. So I've started by wetting down just the chest area, and what I'm doing here is flicking some strokes back into the face, and what we are doing is negatively painting. So we are carving out some strokes of fur on the face that are like hanging over the chest, and at the same time we are shading that area as well. I did initially put down some excess color that I then sort of mopped up. I'm now kind of like going back in and popping a fair amount in there. Again, honestly, like it probably doesn't need to be shaded this much, especially because from memory, the reference photo I used for this dog had a black background. And so I think it was like really dark and black, and then like a spotlight was basically being shone on this dog's head. And I think that that's why the reference had such a drastic shadow on like the neck and chest area. Whereas I think I could have just not done it like that and it would have been fine. But anyway, that's just doing its thing. And in the meantime, I am grabbing a very light amount of this color and just kind of sketching around a few shapes and little shadows that I could see in my photo. So you're just going off my painting here. So essentially I've popped 2 around the eye, on the right eye, kind of like over the top of it, and then on the left eye down the side of it and down the side of the ear. I've popped a little shadow on the right of the nose, and now I'm just putting a couple of little patches in on like the chin on either side. We are going to go in and sort of carve out the ear a little bit to make it stand out from the head. I do end up going over this whole face with a light wash of colour anyway, so no stress. I was, I guess, just trying my best to not put colour down, but the problem is when you are painting on white paper, you do kind of need it to show up, right? So I'm just sketching some little squiggly shapes down the side of the face, on the ear. We're trying to give the impression here of some, longer fur. And so similar to the chest fur on the Bernese Mountain Dog, we don't necessarily want to paint strokes of fur in, but try and look for like the shadows between clumps of fur. With some light grey, just doing some squiggly lines on the ears on this side as well, shading the bottom of them on the left, and just roughly flicking that up. Adding a few more in the middle, trying to make it look like curly long fur, taking the shadow over the left eye and around the whole eye, basically, going around the inner corner. Little shadow on the nose, bringing a shadow in towards the nose on the right. Just really having a play around here, looking for little spots to pop in a shadow. So we are now getting the impression that this dog has longer and curlier fur. The chest is looking very bland at the moment, but we will add to that later on. Going a brown now, and I'm going to pop the eyes in. So if you do not have a brown, you can also get that from a mixture of purple and yellow. You'll just need to put less yellow in it. But my go-to that's left over on the palette was created with orange and a bit of blue. So I've gone and popped a little eye in there, just a nice little circle, and I'm using my 3/0 to just kind of put that in more precisely. I was using a bigger brush, which makes it a bit hard. So swapping over to my detail brush and just really filling in that shape and continuing with that size for the other eye. Very carefully popping that in now. On this side, what I've done is actually leave a little bit of a gap on the inner corner to look like a little bit of fluff in front of the eye. So you can always paint that on later with white gouache if you don't manage to do it, but if you can, that's a really great detail to add. So instead of doing like a full circle, you would leave like a little cutout for some fur in front of it. With some pre-made black from my palette, I am popping in the nostrils, 2 little commas and a little split down the middle of them. You can also make your own black color from mixing the 3 primary colors together, but I'm just doing a bit of a cheat and using Mars Black. Taking it down the center towards the mouth and then painting in some kind of jagged strokes. And again, like negatively painting some fur in on like the top lip. Doing a gentle little bit of scrubbing on an intense patch of fur that's kind of sticking out quite a lot there, just reducing a little bit of the severity, and then drying that all off. With some medium grey on my brush now, I'm doing some of that squiggly, looking for kind of shadows in the clumps of fur on the chest. So same as what we've been doing on the head of the dog, I'm just looking to do that on the chest now because it's looking quite flat and bland. So tucking that all up against the chin and then slowly starting to bring those curved strokes downwards. It's looking a bit intense, but that's okay. So just curling them off to the sides. I really don't think you need to go as dark as I did here. Use your own discretion. Feel free to go lighter. You can always add. The problem with watercolor is it's hard to remove. So you're better off doing this lightly and then adding to it if you don't feel like it's enough, than going in and doing this really intensely and being stuck with it. Adding a really light wash of grey to the bottom of the chin fur. Adding a bit of a shadow around the mouth and just taking that further down. Adding some pre-made black to my palette now. And I'm going to use this for the nose. So I'm going to pop in a little V shape at the bottom of that nose and then start to fill that in. And we will leave a little bit of a highlight at the top as well. So we don't leave it completely blank, but we just kind of fill that with water. So I'm doing that on the top left. And that's just going to make that whole area look a little bit more rounded. Dipping into the light wash of grey again, the one that we mixed, not the watered down black. And this is where I pop this colour over everything. So it was just looking a bit too stark, but again, that's probably just because of how intense I went on the chest fur. So I felt like it needed a wash of very pale colour over the whole thing. I think it's like totally cute how it is at the moment, the head. It's really just the fact that I went so deep on that neck shadow that made me want to keep adjusting everything else. So, you know, if you didn't do that, you could almost be done now, I reckon. You know, pop a couple highlights on and you're finished. But I just kept fiddling and adjusting because I kind of had to just meet it there. And I'm just going to keep yapping while I'm doing this. I'm just lifting some of that colour off now. What I normally do in my realistic portraits is I put a basic wash of colour down on the whole thing. Then I usually paint the darkest part in, which tends to be the eyes or the nostrils or something, the pupils or the nostrils. And then I spend the rest of the painting bridging the gap between those values. And I kind of went about it the wrong way here by starting so dark on that neck fur. I probably should have just done a light wash of colour over the whole thing, then popped the eyes and the nose in, and then I would have had a much lighter set of values to work with. Like I'm quite trapped by how dark it is on that neck fur that I'm feeling the need to keep fiddling with this. So I've darkened up things on the right side of the ear and the face. I'm going in now again with this patch down the bottom and deepening that up. Just trying to bridge the gap between the contrast there. It's a bit too stark, so I'm adding more on the right side of the mouth, down the bottom. We're going to add some shadowing under the eye, and that's just also going to help bring out the shape a little bit more on this puppy's face too. They usually, the cut that they give these type of dogs, they make the muzzle quite kind of rounded. At the moment it's looking a little bit flat, so we are helping to bring out some of that shape there. Deepening up between the ear and the head. So it's starting to balance out now. I'm going to dip into some white gouache and pop some highlights in. Just like every other one, we're working with really quite small eyes, so we want to be really careful here. So with my very detailed brush, I'm dipping into some white. I keep saying gouache. If it's coming out of that little paw palette, it is actually white watercolour. And just dabbing that across the top of the eyes. I will say though, I do recommend gouache. The only reason I'm using white watercolour is because I make my own paint and I can control the pigment load, and so it is a lot more pigmented than a commercial white, which sometimes just does not have the opacity to actually cover up something like, you know, the black of a nose or the pupil of an eye. So bear that in mind. When I say gouache, you know, I mean just an opaque white. I popped a little highlight under the nostrils there and a little bit on the top left of the nose. Dipping back into our purpley grey colour. And again, just looking to adjust these values, particularly down the bottom of this face here, just to match them up with the neck. A little bit of scrubbing on that original one that was just a bit too intense. And shading up the left of the face. Focusing the shading on like the outer edges of this muzzle is just going to help round it out as well. It's going to push those edges backwards into the painting while bringing the pure white part around the nose and mouth forward. Some further shading between the head and the ear. Just popping little squiggles in here and there. And again, just focusing the shading on kind of like the outside of those shapes to help make them fluffy and cloud-like. For goodness knows what reason, I'm adding more colour to the body of this poor dog. But just adding some more there, shading out its little shoulder. And then releasing that a little bit on the far side. Just giving that a bit of a scrub. In an ideal world, for a quick watercolour sketch, I wouldn't want to be doing things like this, you know, mucking around with scrubbing or anything like that. I certainly do it in my realistic portraits, but yeah, in an ideal world, you'd be kind of whizzing through this quite quickly. But that's why I participated in this challenge, is because I needed to learn to loosen up. Dipping into some orangey brown colour here. And I am going to add a little bit of colour to the eye. So just rounding it out a tiny bit more and not really trying to remove the highlight, but just to make the eyes a little bit bigger. So actually extending their size. And final details now, going in with some more of this purpley grey and just continually adding it to the chest of this poor dog that is just really weighed down. It didn't need to be so dark. I really love the head of this little dog, but I think I went too dark on the body. So learn from my mistakes, and I'll see you in the next one.